Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another day of Top Topics of November 5th, 2021. Let us look at the topics that I will be discussing today with you. So, the first is that Pradhan Mantri Narendra Modi launched several projects at Uttarakhand in Kedarnath, Diwali Day Act at USA, WHO grants emergency use listing for Kovacsine. Survey shows majority of the agriculture households are not aware of MSP. WHO grants emergency use listing for Kovacsine. Survey shows majority of the agriculture households are not aware of the MSP. Government makes a case for climate finance to attain goals and meets counterparts. 42 firms get nod for PLI scheme for white goods. RBI releases a statement of commitment to greening of India's financial system. Climate action should focus on cities. Now, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, had launched several projects at Uttarakhand in Kedarnath. He inaugurated Sri Adi Shankaracharya Samadhi and unveiled the statue of Sri Adi Shankaracharya at Kedarnath. Adi Shankaracharya's life was extraordinary as it was devoted to the welfare of common man. Indian philosophy talks about human welfare, and Adi Shankaracharya did the work of making the society aware of this truth. Now, the Samadhi was reconstructed after the destruction in the 2013 floods. The entire reconstruction work has been undertaken under the guidance of the Prime Minister, who has constantly reviewed and monitored the progress of the project. Let us see a few points about Sri Adi Shankaracharya and his philosophy, which will be helpful for you in your GS paper 4, which tells you that you need to study the values and the teachings of various philosophers, administrators, etc. So, Sri Adi Shankaracharya was an 8th century Indian philosopher and a theologian whose works had a strong impact on the doctrine of Advaita Vedanta. Now, Advaita Vedanta is the oldest sub-school of Vedanta. Advaita is composed of two Sanskrit words, a means non and Dvaita means dual. It is one of the Hindu philosophies. It means that there is no other reality other than the Brahman, and the world around us is Maya. The followers of this philosophy seek moksha or liberation through recognizing the illusionaries of this world and acquire vidya or knowledge of one's true identity as Atman and identity of Atman and Brahman. Now, Advaita Vedanta emphasizes on Jivan Mukti, that is, the idea that moksha or freedom or liberation is achievable in this life itself, in contrast to the other philosophies that emphasize Vaideha Mukti or moksha after death. Advaita, like other schools, accepts the Purusartha, that is, the four goals of human life, as natural and proper. Dharma, that is the right way of living, which means ethical way of living, fulfilling one's duties and obligations of individual, not only towards himself and society, but also the society towards the individual. So you can see the ethical value of duties, obligations, which pertain to each and every individual and the various roles they play in the society, which is laid in Dharma. Now, Artha, that is the support and sustain one's life. Kama, that is pleasure and enjoyment. Moksha, liberation and release. Now, of these, the Advaita Vedanta philosophy focuses on gaining the last, that is, liberation in one's current life. Correct knowledge, says Adi Shankaracharya, of Atman and Brahman leads to liberation. He says this very similar to Socrates, who says that knowledge is virtue and the man who knows the right thing will never do wrong. And he also says that knowledge is the highest virtue. According to Advaita Vedanta, liberation can be achieved while living, and he calls it as Jivan Mukti. The Atman knowledge is the knowledge of true self, and its relationship to the Brahman is central to this liberation in Advaita thought. Now, this school holds that liberation can be achieved while living. and a person who achieves this is called as Jivan Mukta. Adi Sankaracharya says that this can be done by the right living. The next topic is Diwali Day Act of USA. Now, the Congress in USA has brought in a bill which aims to make Diwali a nationally recognized holiday in the United States. A vast number of Indians are living in the United States, and they form an important part of the diaspora there. Now, this historic legislation is co sponsored by a number of lawmakers, including the Indian American Congresswoman Radha Krishnamurthy. If the bill gets through, it would be observed, the holiday would be observed in federal institutions, and a significant number of Indian diaspora would be able to enjoy the festival at their homes. Prior to this, the US Postal Service has issued a commemorative stamp to honor Diwali since 2016. Now, Indian Americans are the second largest immigrant group in United States. According to the data from 2018 American Community Survey, which is conducted by the US Census Bureau, there are 4.2 million people of Indian origin residing in United States. Diwali is one of the major festivals celebrated by Hindus, Jain, Sikh, Buddhist, notably the Newar Buddhist. The festival usually lasts for 5 days, and it is celebrated during the Hindu lunisolar month of Kartika that comes between October and November. The festival is widely associated with Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity, with many other regional traditions connecting the holiday to Sita and Rama, Vishnu, Krishna, Yama, Yami, Durga, Kali, Hanuman, Ganesha, Kubera, Vishwakarman, etc. Furthermore, it is in some regions that this day is celebrated when Lord Rama returned to his kingdom, Ayodhya, with his wife Sita and brother Lakshmana after defeating Ravana in Lanka and serving a 14 years of exile. Another important topic of today is WHO grants emergency use listing for Kovacsine. Now, this is a sort of good news for India, especially for the pharmaceutical industry in India, and most so for Bharat Biotech, the producer of Kovacsine. Kovacsine is India's first indigenous COVID vaccine and produced by Hyderabad-based Bharat Biotech. In July, Bharat Biotech had announced the safety and efficacy details of the phase 3 clinical trials of this vaccine and stated that Kovacsine demonstrated 77.8% effectiveness against symptomatic COVID-19 and 65.2% against the new Delta variant. Besides Kovacsine, the WHO has approved vaccines developed by Pfizer, BioNTech, US pharma majors like Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, China Sinopharm, and Oxford AstraZeneca for emergency use. Now, the EUL, or the emergency use listing process, determines if a manufactured product is quality assured, safe and effective. Now, once the WHO has given the emergency use listing for vaccine, world over various countries can put an indent to India for the vaccine and use it to vaccine against COVID-19. Now, the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization is centered in issuing evidence-based policy recommendation for the best use of vaccines against COVID-19. Let us look at a few points that why this decision by WHO is a significant one. Now, the WHO clearance is a step in Covaxin being accepted by foreign governments. It will remove the uncertainty around overseas travel by Indians who are inoculated with this vaccine. Also, the emergency use listing is a prerequisite for vaccine to be supplied through COVAX, the Global COVID Vaccine Equity Scheme. It is a significant step towards fighting the COVID-19 and will also deal with equity in access to vaccine, because many countries do not have their own produced vaccine and rely on COVAX or other countries for the COVID-19 vaccine. This is also very good news for the pharmaceutical in India, because once again it has proved its efficiency as a pharmacy of the world. Kovacsine is one of the 6 vaccines that have received emergency use authorization from the Indian drug regulator, and it is being used as in the nationwide inoculation program along with Covishield and Sputnik V. Now, the EUL authorization will enable India to contribute to the accelerating equitable access of COVID-19 vaccine, and access to vaccine globally addresses the current public health emergency. So, the last week, even the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention had put Kovacsine on the list of qualifying COVID-19 vaccine candidates under the category of participants in certain COVID-19 vaccine, making the Indians who are inoculated by Kovacsine easily to enter in the United States. Also, Australia recognized Kovacsine for the purpose of establishing a traveller's vaccination status. Apart from Australia, let me tell you, there are several other countries like Oman, Philippines, Mexico, etc., who have now allowed travellers who are inoculated with Kovacsine. And now, with the WHO EUL listing, it will make Indians to travel, and even the worldwide people who take this vaccine, that is Kovacsine, make them easier to travel around the world and go to other countries for education, for trips, for leisure, for business, etc. Bharat Biotech said that with the validation of WHO, countries can now expedite their regulatory approval process to import and administer Kovacsine. So it is a very good news for Indian citizens who want to go out to other countries for study, business, etc., and also a very big achievement for the pharmaceutical sector in our country. The next most important news is about survey shows majority of agriculture households are not aware of MSP. Now this is a news in the Hindu business line, and it comes at a time when the various farmers are still protesting to make MSP statutory. Let me tell you that presently the MSP is not a statutory provision, and it is an executive decision that is being given in every farming season to the farmers, and that too for 23 crops varieties. So let us see what are the highlights of this sample survey, and this will help you to write a good answer with regard to supporting whether MSP should be made statutory, or whether the 3 laws where the government has opened up the markets for the farmers is the right decision. Now, the situation assessment of agriculture households and land holdings of households in rural India, that is the National Sample Survey 77th round, revealed that the MSP awareness data. The Government of India, let me tell you, announces MSP for 22 major agriculture commodities of fair average quality each year in both the cropping seasons, Rabi and Kharif, after taking into account the recommendations of the Commission of Agriculture Costs and Prices. The procurement at MSP is done by the union and the state agencies under the various schemes of the government. So some important data came to the fore about the MSP. Now, a majority of the agriculture households in India, the survey says, are not even aware of the MSP concept. The percentage of output sold by the households under the MSP range between 0 to 24.7% except sugarcane. Paddy and wheat growing households dominate the charts of MSP awareness. Interestingly, not even 50% of the households growing various crops for sale are aware of procurement agencies. About 40% of the paddy growing households are aware of the MSPs, showing another 60% are out of the MSP net. About 39.8% of sugarcane growing households, followed by 31% of bajra, 30% of cotton, 28% of soya bean are aware about the MSP. If you look at the data, this number, the percentage does not even cross 50% or even half. So a very less percentage of the crop growing farmers are aware of the MSP, meaning that most of the crops is sold in the market, in the APMCs, or through the middlemen, or even through private dealers. Let us see what are the details it says about procurement agencies. Now, the percentage of household procurement agencies, let me remind you, purchase the crop on the base of MSP. Now, the percentage of households that reported awareness about the procurement agencies ranged between 3 to 4%. Paddy growing households again top the chart in the maximum percentage of output that is sold under MSP. This is because the various food security programs are skewed towards rice and wheat, they too being the staple food of the country. Now, the Shantakumar Committee report released in 2015 asserted that only 6% of the farmers benefited from MSP through the sale of food grains to an official procurement agency. The Union Minister of Agriculture and Farmers told the Lok Sabha in July that MSP policy has to do nothing with the new farm laws. Farmers are free to sell their produce to the government procurement agencies at MSP or APMC markets through their contract farming or an open market, whichever is advantageous to them. So, a few points that we can make out from the survey, and according to my knowledge, is MSP advantage is skewed both towards the crops and also the farmers who reap the benefits of the MSPs, along with the states also. Not all the crops and the farmers enjoy the benefit of MSP. Due to the importance of paddy and wheat in food security programs, more cultivation of these water guzzling crops is happening, which is leading to devastation of the soil ecosystem and also the water imbalance in the region, leading to large scale groundwater exploitation. Widening of the markets and food processing will help the farmers to earn more, as most of the farmers still are unknown to the procurement agencies and also the MSP. Food security schemes that include foods grown in the local region and climate so that the present MSP can help the variety of the crops and farmers will be helpful. Rather than focusing only on rice and wheat, there are regions who have their staple food. For example, in the south, it is rice along with bajra or jawar. In the west, again, it is wheat, groundnut, bajra, and jawar. In the north, it is wheat, you have mustard, etc. And similarly, there is a different staple food which you find in the eastern states based on the climate and the culture there. So the government focusing on region wise and also giving importance to the crops which are being imported on a large scale, likewise which it had done few years back, 4 to 5 years back, when the pulses production had fallen down drastically. This will help to cultivate other crops also, and there will be a balance. Also, a statutory backing will not be helpful as most of the farmers are not aware of the MSP, and it will put further burden on the government already, which has been facing the burden of subsidies in terms of food and also the fertilizers along with other fuel products. So if you see the diagram here in this bar chart, you can see that the low awareness of MSP and procurement process, it has given it for two seasons, that is from July to December for the Kharif and January to June. In July to December for the Kharif, you have the awareness about the MSP is high in paddy, the blue bars, that is paddy, sugarcane, bajra, cotton, soya bean. It is very less in terms of ragi, coconut, urad, maize, groundnut, etc. And if you see in the rabi crops, then you have high awareness of the MSP in sugarcane, paddy, again ahar, and rapeseed, and very less in coconut, jawar, maize, and masoor. Also, with regard to awareness of that a procurement agency procures the crops from the farmers by an MSP is high among the sugarcane crops, bajra crop, paddy crop, soybean crop, etc. And in the two seasons, the awareness of both MSP and also the procurement agency is high for sugarcane, paddy, cotton, jawar, etc. Farmers in the eastern India are worse placed with regard to receiving the government's minimum support price for their crops. Also, states that are most reaping the benefits of the MSP is Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. Moving on to our next topic for today, that is government makes a case for climate finance to attain goals, meets counterparts. Now this is regarding the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, Bhupendra Yadav making the case strong for climate finance to help the developing countries to meet the adaptation and mitigation goals of climate change, along with demanding for an increase in the climate finance at the COP26. So the climate finance, first let's see what does it mean. It refers to local, national, transnational financing which may be drawn from public, private and alternative sources of finance. Climate finance is critical to addressing the climate change because large scale investments are required not only to reduce emissions but also to mitigate and adaptation of climate change with respect to infrastructure, etc. So in 2009, the rich countries had pledged that they would spend 1 billion a year on financing climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies every year until 2020. However, this goal was not largely met. Now, this understanding forms the basis of the Paris Accord, which aims to lower the greenhouse gas emissions well below 2 degrees centigrade. In line of this, the United Nations then created a dedicated fund called as the Green Climate Fund to distribute the proceeds of the fund to countries. The Green Climate Fund became the largest climate-specific fund to receive 18 billion since its inception. So, stressing the need for adequate finance from the rich countries to attain the climate goals, India, at a meeting of the like minded developing countries, stated that climate finance cannot continue at the levels that it was decided at 2009 and said that it should be at least 1 trillion from 1 billion to meet the goals of addressing climate change, and there should be a system to monitor both the climate finance as well as how the monitoring is happening for mitigation. India, Brazil, South Africa, and China, which are called as the basic countries at the beginning of the summit, had also asked for a roadmap for providing 100 billion annual funding. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently made the announcement of Panchamrit. Let me just summarize these points again once again for you. That is achieving carbon neutrality by 2070, achieving 500 gigawatt of installed capacity through non-fossil fuels by 2030, fulfilling 50% of energy requirements by renewables by 2030, reducing 1 billion ton of carbon emissions by 2030, and reducing the carbon intensity by 45% in its economy. The other next news which is important is that 42 firms get a nod for PLI on white goods. Now, the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade said that 42 companies have been selected under the Production Link Incentive Scheme for white goods. This scheme was launched in the aftermath of the pandemic to achieve Atmanirbharta or self-reliance in the manufacturing sector, and it covers almost 13 key sectors of the economy to improve manufacturing and to be a part of the global supply chain and to reduce India's dependence on imports. So these white goods are large electric goods that are used at homes and offices, usually like ACs, refrigerators, etc. So the total outlay for the PLI scheme for white goods only is about 6,200 crore for the manufacture of components and sub-assemblies of air conditioners and LED lights. Now, this scheme had received the Union Cabinet approval in April. The scheme will be implemented for 7-year period. So, what is the importance of the scheme? Now, currently, there is an insignificant manufacturing of high-value components of ACs like compressors, copper tubing, aluminium stock for foils. Many components like control assemblies for indoor units or outdoor units are not manufactured in enough quantity in the country, thereby the country resorting to imports. All these components now under the PLI scheme for white goods will be manufactured in India in significant quantities so that India will also become an exporter of these products and join the global supply chain. In line with Pradhan Mantri's clarion call for Atmanirbharta to bring manufacturing to the center stage and to drive India's economic growth and create jobs, the Government of India has given its approval to introduce PLI scheme for 13 sectors with a total outlay of 1,97,000 crore. Similarly, LED chip packaging, LED drivers, LED engines, LED light management systems, etc., will also be manufactured in India in high quantities. This is a huge step towards Atmanirbhar Bharat in important sectors of the economy. It will not only bring in investments but also make India a part of the global supply chain and improve jobs. Moving on now, this is something related to green financing, very much in tune with the COP26 meeting that is going on. So, the RBI, that is Central Bank of India, has released a statement of commitment to greening of India's financial system. Now, the RBI had recently published its statement of commitment to support greening of India's financial system. RBI joined the Network for Greening the Financial System as a member on April 23rd, 2021. The Network for Greening the Financial System was launched at the Paris One Planet Summit in December 2017. The Network for Greening of Financial System is a group of central banks and supervisors who are willing to share their best practices and contribute to developing of the environment and risk management to support a transition towards sustainable economy by providing finance. Now banks play a very important role in financing the various sectors of the economy, and now green finance is one of the major roles that the banks will be playing in achieving sustainable development goals. So the Apex Bank joined the central banks and supervisors of Network for Greening of Financial System as a member on April 23rd, and now the RBI aims to learn from as well as to contribute to the global efforts of green finance. Let us see what is green finance. Green finance is financial arrangements that are specific to use for projects that are environmentally sustainable or projects that adopt aspects of climate change. Now, environmentally sustainable projects include production of energy from renewable sources like solar, wind, biogas, etc., clean transportation that involves lower greenhouse gas emission, energy efficient projects like green building, waste management that includes recycling, efficient disposal and conversion to energy. Green finance covers a wide range of financial products and services which can be divided into investment, banking, insurance products. The predominant financial instruments in green finance are debt and equity. To meet the growing demand, new financial instruments such as green bonds and carbon market instruments have been established, along with new financial institutions such as green banks and green funds. So, what is the importance of banking in sustainable development? Since no development is possible without some financial system, RBI has been playing a very important role in furthering the goal of sustainable development through priority sector lending to new and renewable projects, and also it has eased the norms of external commercial borrowings for renewable energy projects. The Government of India, along with the RBI, that is the central bank, has launched a number of niche specialized funds and schemes such as Textile Upgradation Fund, Credit Linked Capital Subsidy Scheme, and Tannery Modernization Scheme with the desire to move Indian enterprises towards cleaner production. So, the government and the RBI has been taking steps for green financing much before, but now this will provide which will this will provide a framework, and also the membership will lead to sharing of knowledge, technology, and also help to adapt more green financing norms and instruments to help the greener sectors of the economy, and to live up to the goals of adaptation and mitigation of climate change. So India also, we should remember, is among the few countries which has introduced a carbon tax. Now the clean energy cess imposed on coal mined in India is collected into the National Key Clean Energy Fund, which will support research and innovation in clean energy technologies. Coming to the last topic of today is an editorial from the Hindu Business Line, which talks about climate action should focus on cities. As we know, urbanization is rising at a rapid pace, not only in India but also world over, and these being growth centers or poles of growth and development, there with also increasing energy use and change in landscape, it is even more important to focus on centers with respect to adaptation mitigation of climate change. The writer therefore speaks of a spate of climatic related disasters happening in cities which you have been seeing on recently, and he then goes on to suggest city-wise plans to beat the climate stress. So what are the main points that he discusses in the editorial? Let's see. Now, in the last few months, they have been experiencing world worst climatic catastrophes all over the world. The world witnessed unexpected events such as the heat dome in Canada, flash floods in Germany, unprecedented snow in Spain, extraordinary spell of rain in China, and flooding in New York. These apart, the forest fires in Australia have destroyed the flora and fauna in large areas. Large scale fossil fuel usage to push growth and development has been the main cause. Construction today is another big contributor to pollution. Especially the coastal cities are becoming more vulnerable to climatic related events such as hurricanes, tropical cyclones, etc. As urbanization increased the shift of economy from agriculture, pressure mounted on energy requirements in cities is more, and as more and more people move to cities, there is more and more requirement for energy for not only mobility and lighting and cooking, for other aspects of the economy. So the writer calls that there is a need to change our energy mix, which is now mostly made up of coal in India and oil 32% and traditional biomass 20%. The writer says that though India has ambitious decarbonization targets, but achieving them is happening at a very slow pace. India's energy policy is focused on solar, wind, gas, biofuels, etc., but the implementation process needs to be fastened. Globally, cities account for 50% of the world population and 80% of the global emissions, and they are epicenters of environmental stress. Therefore, targeting the cities would not only bring focus to national plans but also serve as a very efficient way to give concentration given the concentration of emissions in cities. So, what does he say about the city wise plans? Let us see. He says that to achieve national level targets, urgent need is to have city-wise plans. The city and town administration should be held accountable for implementing unified clean energy roadmap. There should be incentives for achievers for X tax breaks or low cost utility per unit to achieving geographical area. Also, citizen participation in the cities will be more forthcoming as they are increasingly to face environmental pressure. For example, many tier 2 cities have shown low rise housing and they can be used for top solar power generation, which is a very sustainable and reliable supply of energy to power homes. Then he also says that shift to CNG powered public transportation in Delhi demonstrates what focused city level targets can achieve. This can be a model for CNG transportation in other cities. He also gives the example of the Chinese city of Shenzhen in electrifying the entire fleet of buses, which is another example of power of city-based targets. So finally, the Sustainable Development Goal 11 calls for sustainable cities and communities. The world is becoming increasingly urbanized, and almost 60% of the population will be living in cities by 2030. As they are powerhouses of economic growth and contribute to 60% of GDP, and also along with that emit 70% of carbon emissions and use 60% of resource base, it is more pertinent to focus on cities for dealing with environmental stress. Rapid urbanization is also growing in large number of slum dwellers. Inadequate and overburdened infrastructure like waste collection, water sanitation systems, roads transportation, pollution of air is worsening, and unplanned urban sprawl is eating away to the forests and other green areas. Therefore, the writer calls for city specific plans to deal with the environmental stress along with beating climate change. And as most of the population stays in cities, I think there should be city based plans for dealing with climate change and also environmental stress, so that a major part of the work is already done, as rural areas contribute much less to the environmental stress in comparison to the cities. So this is a timely call to focus on cities when the already discussions are underway, and already Sustainable Development Goal 11 says that there is a need to have sustainable cities and communities by 2030. So city based focus plans and also making the cities more sustainable will help to deal with major parts of challenge of global warming and climate change. So this brings me to the end of the topics of this day. I will be meeting you all tomorrow with another important topics. Until then, bye bye.